We wake each morning, rush through breakfast. We don't rush through that thing we call a commute. We put in a lot of hours in the office. We don't rush back through the commute, returning home. We settle in for dinner at what seems to be a late hour. We review the day with our family and friends. We might work yet more. And then we lay our head on the pillow. Sound vaguely familiar to any of you? Is that life? What is life? Is that all there is to life? This one thing after another. Folks have been debating and questioning life for thousands of years, the Greeks and Romans par excellence, trying to figure out what is life. Isn't there something more than what we're doing here? We have a couple of more contemporary examples of folks asking that question. We hear of one this morning, Nicodemus, a rabbi, a teacher. Nicodemus, according to the story, goes to see Jesus in the middle of the night. And it's been popular all these years to interpret that to mean that Nicodemus did not want to be seen by his peers, that he did not want to acknowledge Jesus as perhaps having the answers when their own rabbis were telling the folks in the temple and interpreting the law. So you could not be seen going to Jesus. I'm not sure of that. The text doesn't say it. All we do know is Nicodemus goes to find Jesus. And Nicodemus and Jesus get into this very ironic, humorous tit-for-tat back and forth. Leaving at one point, Jesus looking at Nicodemus and saying, "You must be born again." That phrase that sends shudders down the spine to Episcopalians. You must be born again. Now that phrase can be translated many ways. Born anew, I think, translated most correctly, born from above. And Nicodemus is confused. I've already come out of my mother once. How can I come back through my mother a second time? The humor between these two rabbis back and forth. Sadly, Nicodemus disappears from the scene. He exits the stage, and we hear from him a couple of more times in John. But it seems that Nicodemus perhaps never really got his answer. That's one person struggling to find out what is life. An even more contemporary seeker is someone named Rollin Stewart. I saw Rollin Stewart every Sunday afternoon growing up. Lying on my living room floor watching the Dallas Cowboys. I must add, I was not pulling for the Cowboys. I want that to be quite clear in this audience. It's just when you grow up in Jackson, Mississippi, you either get the Saints or the Cowboys. And the Cowboys were always on because they were America's team, supposedly. But you could never miss Rollin Stewart. After the Cowboys would score a touchdown and the extra point unit would come on or a field goal unit would come on, they would kick, and as the ball is going through the uprights, there you see Rollin hanging over someone with his enormous rainbow afro, holding up a sign that read, John 3:16. We put it on t-shirts, bumper stickers. And now I've noticed that a number of football players are putting it on the black anti-glare patch underneath their eyes. John 3:16, for all the cameras to catch. Sad that all the story of Jesus, all the life of Jesus, his encounters with human beings, his encounter with the marginalized, his teaching, sad that all of that, the entire Jesus story, is somehow now just on a bumper sticker or on an anti-glare patch for a football player. John 3:16. We memorized that, or many of us memorized that scripture growing up in Sunday school, didn't you? Along with a number of others, John 3:16 stood out. You heard it over and over. For God so loved the world that God gave his Son. We've heard it. And perhaps like a lot of church chat and preacher talk, we've heard it so many times that we just really don't hear it anymore. And so when it's hard for us to hear these stories, the ones we hear time and time again, when they get old and crusty, perhaps we need to hear the story anew. Jesus does that. He goes on to tell Nicodemus that just like Moses in the desert, in front of the Hebrew people, Moses takes a snake. He puts it on a stick, and Moses holds it up for the entire Hebrew community to see. And in that day and age, the belief, the devotion that holding up a snake on a stick, on a tree, on a limb, would bring health and wholeness and life to people. People would be healed of all their dis-ease. They would find life. We find that symbol still today. The next time you're driving next to an ambulance, odds are you will see a snake intertwined a tree. The next time you go to see your physician, odds might be on her lapel, on her jacket, you might see a snake intertwined around a tree. All symbols of health, wholeness, giving life. And Jesus said, just as Moses lifted the serpent up in front of the community, so too must the Son of Man be lifted up. That phrase, that John 3:16, really scares us, doesn't it? Show of hands, how many times have you been stopped on the street and asked if you've been saved and know where you're going when you die? How many? When I was in high school, I would have been that person to ask you. And I've always found it rather curious why Christians are so protective of this John 3:16, as if they're doing God's work to separate who's in and who's out. And this John 3:16 sort of becomes a mantra that if you say the words correctly and in order, if you say some prayer, then somehow in that moment, at that exact time, your ticket is checked for all of eternity. And you have a fire insurance policy to boot. That tends to be the way we treat John 3:16. Jesus said, just as Moses lifted up a serpent, the Son of Man must be lifted up in front of the community to draw all to him, draw all for life. I attended a Presbyterian seminary, Princeton Seminary, and The young woman I dated there at Princeton grew up an Episcopalian. She converted to the Presbyterian Church through her father. You see, one particular morning in a Pittsburgh suburb, the rector extended an altar call, asked for people to come down and get saved. Emily's father promptly stood up, grabbed his wife's hand, Emily's hand, marched out the back door, and became Presbyterians. I'm about to extend an altar call. In just a few moments, with body and blood, we lift up a serpent, just as Moses lifted up a serpent on the cross, on a stick. We, in just a moment, will lift up body and blood, life for all of us. And when that time comes, in just a few moments, I invite all of you to make your way to this altar.